Okay, so we have ionic bonding. Ionic bonding, we'll just go over ionic bonding briefly again. So yesterday we talked about different types of chemical bondings, and उसमें से we discussed covalent bonding, we discussed ionic bonding, and we also discussed metallic bonding in very much detail. Uh, we talked about covalent bonding. Covalent bonds are formed between non-metal atoms only, and that is through the sharing of electrons. Ionic bonding occurs between non-metals and metals, and that occurs because metals have a tendency to lose electrons, so they are uh, reducing agents, and nonmetals have a tendency to gain electrons, so they are oxidizing agents. And we will talk about oxidizing agents and reducing agents in more detail in the chapter of redox reactions. Okay, but this loss of electrons by the metals results in uh, formation of positive ions, and positive ions are known as cations. Whereas the negative ions, on the other hand, are formed when the non-metal atoms gain electrons, right? So these will form the negative ions or the anions, and the force of attraction, the electrostatic force of attraction between sodium, which forms a positive ion, so a metal atom, and a negatively charged non-metal atom, is what results in the formation of ionic bond. The strong attractive force, the strong electrostatic attractive force, is known as the ionic bond, right? So let's just go over a very common example, which is often repeated in past papers. So we have the example of a typical ionic compound, very famous ionic compound known as sodium chloride, right? So I'll just open up my whiteboard here and just show you how the transfer of electrons actually occurs. So before I start, can anyone tell me if we talk about any atom, which shell of the atom takes part in bonding? कोई भी बता दे मुझे.
क्वेश्चन समझ नहीं आया.
हाँ, the question is कि कोई भी एटम जो होता है उसका कौन सा शेल टेक्स पार्ट इन बॉन्डिंग?
वैलेंस शेल आउटर मोस्ट.
एग्जैक्टली, ठीक है. The valence shell or the outermost electrons take part in the bonding process, right? Inner electrons का कोई लेना देना नहीं होता bonding. Inner electrons चाहे जितने मर्जी हो, they will not take part in bonding. So उसके लिए तो कंफ्यूज होने की जरूरत ही नहीं ना, क्योंकि अंदर वाले इलेक्ट्रॉन्स बिल्कुल भी बॉन्डिंग में इन्वॉल्व नहीं होते. So we are discussing the example of sodium chloride, right? Sodium chloride is a typical ionic compound and is commonly known as table salt. So sodium chloride का जो symbol होता है, it is NaCl, right? And Na is the metallic atom which is positively charged, so it has positive one charge, and chlorine has a negative one charge. So this is a chloride ion and a sodium ion, and they both attract each other to form the sodium chloride. So uh, can anyone just volunteer? So let's just draw the electronic configuration and the transfer of electrons. So sodium का अगर मैं outermost shell बनाऊं, so how many electrons does sodium have, Maham? How many electrons does sodium have in total? This is a question from you, Maham. Okay, I think Maham's mic is not working. I don't know.
Yeah,
Ah,
my mic wasn't working.
okay, okay. So how many electrons does sodium have in total?
Um, 8.
No, 11. Just, it's not that hard. Just look at the periodic table, and the atomic number equals the number of electrons, right? So sodium is supposed to have 11 electrons in total, right? But since sodium belongs to group 1, So how many electrons should it have in its outermost shell or the valence shell? Azlan.
One.
Yes. Mohammed. Yes, exactly. Good. One, right? So sodium should have only one electron in its outermost shell. Now, in order to fulfill the octet rule, it should have 8 electrons, right? To achieve a stable electronic configuration, to achieve that ideal noble gas configuration. But it has only one electron revolving in its outermost shell. So it can either gain 7 electrons, or it can just, lose this one electron. So what is easier, losing this one electron, or just gaining 7?
One.
Exactly, losing one, right? So it has to lose one electron, but it has to give this electron to another atom, right? Which is in need of that one electron. Let's just look at chlorine here. So chlorine, we'll draw, oh, wait. So we'll draw chlorine. I don't know what's wrong with this. Okay, so we'll draw chlorine. Azan, chlorine belongs to which group? पता है ये वाले जो common elements होते हैं ना, you need to remember these should be on your fingertips. Chlorine जो है ना, it belongs to group 7, right? So it's a halogen, right? So group 7 element is, it should have like 7 electrons in its outermost shell, right? The group number corresponds to the number of electrons in the outermost shell. So it should have 7 electrons. So I just fill them singly first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? Now it has only one free space, right? This electron right here, this is an unpaired electron. So for chlorine or any other non-metal atom for that matter, it is easier to gain electrons, right? Instead of losing all 7 to fulfill the octet rule. So sodium wants to lose one electron, but chlorine wants to gain one, right? So sodium will lose this electron to chlorine. So there will be an electronic transfer. Now, what happens is, what is the charge on an electron? Maham, what is the charge of an electron?
A negative.
Negative charge, right? Electrons are negatively charged. So if sodium lost one electron, uh, sodium will become more positive, right? It has lost one negative charge. So if it loses one electron, it will gain a positive charge, right? So it lost one electron to chlorine. So chlorine gained that electron from sodium, right? So it comes here. So, yeah, and it is just, lost from here, right? So now sodium has the inner 8 electrons. Okay, so this outer shell is now finished. क्योंकि अब outer shell में there is no electron, right? So outer shell तो खत्म हो गया सोडियम का. तो अब अंदर वाला shell जो है, it is completely filled. So अंदर वाले shell में तो there are full number of electrons. There are 8 electrons in the inner shell of sodium, right? So यहाँ पर सोडियम का तो octet rule fulfill हो गया. Got it? On the other hand, chlorine also gained one electron from sodium, right? So it should get a negative charge. Okay, now it's more negative because of gaining one electron. So it should just gain a negative charge here, right? So the positive charged sodium atom and the negatively charged chloride ion. Okay, so now because of this transfer of electrons, they are now charged, right? Sodium lost an electron, chlorine gained an electron. They've turned into ions, right? So because of loss of electron, sodium is now a positive ion, and because of gain of electron, chloride is now a negative ion. So what what do opposite charges do? Maham, what do opposite charges do? Do they repel or do they attract?
Attract.
Exactly, they attract. Okay. So sodium and chlorine will just attract each other. These ions will attract each other because they have the opposite charges, and they will form sodium chloride, right? And it's an ionic compound. And this ionic compound will be arranged in a lattice, which I showed you yesterday. So that lattice is like a crystal for sodium chloride. And if you take like a grain of salt, take a 1 grain of salt and you view it under a very powerful microscope, so you see that lattice structure. All of these sodium and chloride atoms are arranged in that lattice. That lattice somewhat looks like this. So we have sodium at one end, which I'll just represent by this black blob, and we have chloride, which I'll represent by this purple blob. So chloride at the other end, and then we have sodium at the other end as well, right? And then we have chloride again right here, right? So these just attract each other and they form this lattice structure, okay? And this keeps on repeating over and over again, and it forms like a really, really, really large crystal. This is known as a lattice, okay? The lattice of sodium chloride. So how will you represent this in uh, in the paper? See, so how will you draw this in the paper? So let's go over that. So once you're done drawing the structure for sodium chloride, what you'll do is okay, you'll draw sodium, you'll write Na, okay? You'll write Na, you'll draw the outermost shell. So yeah, do make sure okay, if you're representing the electrons of one atom by a cross, तो वो cross ही रहना चाहिए उसका, ठीक है? So for example, sodium after losing that one electron to chlorine, it is left with the inner 8 electrons, right? So it now has a noble gas configuration. So you'll put this in brackets, okay? And you'll outside the bracket you'll write +1. Okay? Whereas on the other hand, you'll draw similar brackets, okay? And you'll draw chloride ion. Okay, so chloride ion क्या हो जाएगा? Chloride Cl and then a circle. अच्छा, no need to draw a circle for this, ठीक है? इस पे marks करते हैं, इसके अंदर वाला circle बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है आप लोगों को, ठीक है? Just write Na and then draw a circle. So chloride के electron जो है, I'll represent it using uh, circle. So a circle for the electrons of chloride. So just fill them singly. अच्छा, अब मुझे ना अजलान, you'll tell me कि मैं यहाँ एक mistake कर रहा हूँ, and you'll just tell me कि मैंने वो mistake क्या की है इस structure में. What is the mistake?
There's no inner shell. Inner shell.
No, no, no. You don't need to draw the inner shell. क्योंकि even bonding में inner shells don't take part. You don't need to draw the inner shell. See, the mistake here is okay, chlorine gained 1 electron from sodium, right? So it shouldn't be like a, 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 a circle here. So, yeah, so this should be a cross. So, yeah, this is very important. You have to show okay, this electron came from sodium. So since you're representing the electrons of sodium using a cross, so you have to put one cross here, right? That's how you'll draw the electronic structures of sodium chloride, if it's ever asked in your exam. And you can apply this rule in any other ionic compound, whether it's potassium bromide, whether it's lithium fluoride. कोई भी ionic compound है उसमें एक ये rule apply होगा. सही है? अच्छा, for example, what if you have like an ionic compound, um, let's say you have calcium chloride, you have calcium chloride, and it has like 2 written. तो आपने simply ये करना है कि बस bracket के बाहर ना, bracket के बाहर, for example, let's assume that this is calcium here, ठीक है? And यहाँ पे calcium chloride है, तो अगर CaCl2 है ना, so you just write 2 outside the bracket, ठीक है? Simple. अगर इस तरह का कोई ionic compound आया, so you just have to write 2 outside the bracket, and that's showing CaCl2. और obviously calcium जो it loses 2 electrons, so यहाँ पर +2 होना चाहिए. Right, so that's all for ionic bonding. Hope it was easy to understand. अगर किसी को कोई भी question है, if you have any queries, you may ask. Otherwise, we can move on.